Michael Evans wakes up in his enormous mansion. His day begins like any other. Coffee, the newspaper, stock market updates. But everything feels like a backdrop to the emptiness that fills his soul. Despite the luxury and comfort around him, Michael hasn't found joy in any of it for a long time. His true treasures were lost along with Elizabeth. Michael walks over to the portrait of his wife hanging in his study. Her gentle smile seems alive, but it's just an echo from the past. 5 years ago, a car accident took her life, and since then, Michael has woken up every day in an empty world. He blames himself. It was his insistence to travel that day, his decision to drive the car that lost control and crashed into a tree. Elizabeth was his best friend, his support, his inspiration. She believed in him even when he doubted himself. After her death, Michael was left alone. He tries to focus on work to avoid thinking, but every success, every figure on his bank statement reminds him that she's no longer here, that he no longer has a purpose except to simply exist. The evening ahead of him is a charity event organized by his company. Michael hesitates, unsure whether to attend. He doesn't want to face the public, doesn't want to be part of a world that no longer matters to him. However, after a moment of reflection, he looks at Elizabeth's portrait and decides, she always wanted me to help others. This is her wish. So, be it. Michael arrives at the charity event, held in a luxurious hotel by the shore. Everything around him is perfectly organized, from the elegant outfits of the guests to the sparkling champagne glasses. Yet, for Michael, this world feels like a show he no longer wants to be part of. He enters the hall, but there's no smile on his face. He's just doing what's expected of him, thanking people for their support and for their donations to the charity. In his mind, there's only one thing, the accident. Everyone around him appears successful and happy, but Michael knows he's not like them. He replays all those moments when he could have changed things. Instead of taking the direct route, he decided to go through the mountains. If only he hadn't insisted, Elizabeth would still be alive. It's his fault. At the event, Michael runs into a few familiar faces. He exchanges pleasantries with business partners, but his mind keeps returning to that dreadful night. Richard, his longtime friend and business partner, notices that Michael seems too nervous. He approaches him and asks if he needs a break. "Michael, you look tired. Are you all right?" Richard asks, trying to offer some comfort. Michael glances at him, but quickly turns his gaze back to the crowd of people laughing and chatting. His words are barely audible. "I don't think I'll ever be all right." Richard tries to cheer him up, suggesting they talk about business or their work, but Michael declines. He feels the walls of the hotel closing in on him and quickly exits the hall to get some fresh air outside. Michael walks along the shore, gazing at the dark water. Here alone, he finds himself once again consumed by thoughts about how different things could have been. The question that haunts him, why am I still alive? After leaving the charity event, Michael walks through the city, as if looking for some connection to reality. The air by the shore is cold and biting, but it doesn't matter. He's long been used to the coldness inside him. He just wants to escape everything. Escape from the company, from people, from himself. In the faces of passers-by, he sees their own shadows, but it's not them that trouble him. It's only her, Elizabeth. Her shadow haunts him. Every glance, every step reminds him of how she used to sit beside him, how she laughed, how she held his hand in moments when he was at his lowest. Now, she's just memories. And then, suddenly, he sees her. No, it can't be her. It can't be Elizabeth. But the woman in the wheelchair passing by him has the same hairstyle and appearance as his late wife. Her face seems familiar, yet so different, as if time and death have erased its details. Michael immediately stops. His heart skips a few beats. He tries to convince himself it's just his imagination. Yet the woman turns towards him and looks directly into his eyes. Her gaze pierces his heart. She doesn't say a word, but he feels like she knows him. that this isn't just a coincidence. "Excuse me, do we know each other?" he unexpectedly asks. The woman looks at him for a few seconds, then slowly casts her gaze downward. Michael tries to understand the feeling her stare evokes in him, and in that moment, as silence surrounds them, he suddenly feels a heavy burden on his shoulders, as if death itself has come to remind him of its presence. Michael stands frozen, his legs seemingly glued to the pavement. The woman in the wheelchair slowly drifts away, and although he wants to rush after her, something stops him. What would he even say? His heart races, and a wave of unease and confusion sweeps over him, penetrating every fiber of his being. Finally, he decides he can't just let it go to chance. He takes a step forward, quickly catching up to the woman who's almost disappeared from view. His heart pounds as he approaches her. As he gets closer, he can't shake the feeling that he's stepping into a trap of his own memories that he can no longer control. "Excuse me, but I know this seems strange, but you look so much like my wife. I'm sorry, I don't want to be intrusive, but you look like Elizabeth," he stammers, his voice trembling with emotion, yet he forces himself to say the words. The woman raises her head and meets his gaze. In her eyes, Michael sees something that stirs both unease and fascination in him. It can't be her, but still, there's something familiar about her eyes, as if they carry the memory of something distant, of a pain he once saw in Elizabeth's face. She remains silent, but her lips quietly whisper, "I know who you are." Michael stands stunned, his thoughts scattering in every direction. He wants to ask who she is, what is happening, but he can't find the words. Instead, he simply stands there, feeling as if his heart is breaking from this strange encounter. The woman slowly smiles, and Michael feels a wave of emotion overwhelm him. Is this truly a meeting from his past, or just a cruel coincidence? He doesn't know, but he senses that his life will never be the same again. "We need to talk," she says quietly, and her words feel like a command. Michael feels his heart pounding in his chest. He stands before the woman who looks like his deceased wife, but it's impossible. It can't be her. All his thoughts and emotions intertwine into a tangled mess: despair, disbelief, fear. "We need to talk," she repeats, and her words echo in his mind. They slide over his consciousness like a cold wave. Michael can't believe his ears. He looks at her, unsure of what to do. He's not ready for this encounter. What does she mean? What does she want from him? Is it just his imagination searching for a way to reconnect with the one who was everything to him? "What are you talking about?" he finally says, his voice breaking with emotion. The woman instinctively looks away and raises her hand, almost as if shielding herself from him. It's a gesture he knows well. Elizabeth used to do it when she had difficulty opening up or when she didn't want to share something personal. I can't tell you right now," she answers softly, but her voice trembles, as if it's a great secret she's afraid to reveal. Michael realizes he can't leave it like this. He needs to figure out what's going on. He resolutely sits beside her on the bench, studying her face, where traces of pain and struggle are still visible. "Who are you? And why do you look like her? Why do I feel like I know you?" he utters, watching her reaction. The woman looks at him again. Her gaze, full of sorrow, seems to pierce his soul. "You're not ready for this," she says, her voice sounding as if she's known all the answers to his questions for a long time, but for some reason, she doesn't want to reveal them. Michael feels his heart tighten with an inexplicable ache. He can't understand why he's overwhelmed by such a strong sense of connection with this woman, even though it's impossible. Her gaze, her voice, her movements, everything seems so familiar, as if time is pulling him back to the past. "I want to know the truth. I can't just leave it like this," he says with a resolve that begins to break through his doubts. Michael looks at the woman sitting next to him. Her gaze, filled with sorrow and pain, never leaves his face. She seems reluctant to speak, and that only increases his anxiety. His heart beats faster, as if it's trying to escape his chest to find an answer to the question that has been haunting him for so long. Why do you look like this? He asks, even though he knows this question has no clear answer. There's a mix of wonder and an inexplicable sense that it all makes sense, even if he can't understand how. The woman looks away, but only for a moment. Then she meets his gaze again and says, I can't explain everything to you right now, but I can tell you one thing. I've been with you, Michael. I was there when you lost everything, and I can't leave you now. His heart lurches, as if struck by lightning. It feels like everything in his life, all his pain, all his loneliness. It's not just a struggle. She was part of it all, and it's harder than he could ever imagine. What do you mean? His voice turns hoarse, as if he's starting to understand, but refuses to believe it. You don't remember me, but I was there, she says, her words like cold truth. We were close, Michael. Very close. But everything changed. Michael feels his mind slipping into the deep sea of memories he tried to forget. Images surface in his mind, her hands, her smile, her voice. But these images aren't exactly what he remembers. They're blending with the shadows that have long been a part of his soul. You're telling me you were with me before Elizabeth died, he asks, even though he doesn't believe his own words. It just can't be true. If this is real, why didn't she show up sooner? Why now? I was with you, Michael, and I was with your family before everything fell apart. But I had to leave. I couldn't stay when you were in that state. Her voice trembles, barely audible. Michael tries to get his thoughts in order, but they scatter like waves in a storm. There's only one thing he knows for sure. He needs to know the truth. Why did you leave us? And why have you come back now? He asks, unable to stay silent any longer. The woman takes a deep breath and sighs, her eyes welling with tears. Because you haven't finished your journey, Michael. You haven't conquered your demons yet. And I can't let you do it alone. Michael feels the ground beneath him crack, as if it wants to swallow him whole. He can't understand how it all connects, but one thing is certain. His life will never be the same again. Michael sits next to the woman, who seems to know more than she's willing to share. Her eyes reflect the same pain he's felt since losing Elizabeth, but it can't be her. It's impossible. Yet at the same time, he feels that this isn't a coincidence. Why has she appeared now? Why at this moment? Michael closes his eyes, trying to calm himself, but the inner pain doesn't let go. He feels that something deeply hidden in his soul is ready to break free. All these years after Elizabeth's death, he tried to forget, tried to move on, but everything remained unfinished, empty. I can't stay silent anymore, he finally says, standing up. His voice is soft but filled with firm resolve. The woman looks at him, her eyes filled with understanding. She glances at his hands, gripping the edge of the bench as if Michael is trying to hold himself together, not lose control. What do you want from me? Michael asks, not taking his eyes off her face. I want you to understand, Michael. You haven't lost everything. What you now call pain and loneliness is just part of your journey. But you've forgotten something. What I've always been beside you. And now I'm here to help you find what you're searching for. Michael feels his mind start to unravel. She speaks as though she knows every step he's taken, every thought he's had. He can't disregard her words, even though they sound too strange, too unclear. I don't want to play your games anymore, he says sharply, but there's more than just anger in his voice. There's sorrow. I want to know the truth. The woman remains silent for a moment, then speaks again, but her voice is almost a whisper, like a murmur in the dark. You're afraid of the truth, Michael. You're afraid of what you might see. But the truth is the only thing that can bring you peace. You must be ready to see it all. Her words reach deeper than he expected. Michael feels his heart quiet, his mind filling with unease. It seems like he's standing on the brink of a great secret, one he's not yet ready to understand. I'm not ready, I can't. I don't know if I can survive this, he says, holding on to his resolve, though he feels he has no strength left. The woman stands, leaving the wheelchair behind, and approaches him. Michael can hardly believe his eyes. She moves so easily, as if everything that's happened so far was just a hallucination. She simply walks toward him, and he feels his heart stop as he realizes this is a moment when everything will change. This is the moment when he will learn more than he's ready for. We must go together, Michael. Otherwise, you'll remain in the darkness forever. Michael slowly looks at her face. He understands that his life will never be the same again, and perhaps these steps toward the truth are what he's been searching for all his life. Michael stands on the brink of change. His heart beats so loudly, he can almost hear each thudding pulse in his ears. He looks at the woman standing before him, unbothered by her wheelchair, and feels the weight of the unknown, dark uncertainty that fills every part of him. "We have to go," she repeats, her voice firm, with an undertone of urgency, as if this moment is the only one that can save his soul from the abyss. Michael gazes into her eyes, where he sees reflected his deepest fears and doubts. Is he ready? Does he have the strength to walk through what he's tried to leave behind? All these years after Elizabeth's death, he's tried to find peace. He's accumulated wealth, traveled, sought solace in wine and women. But now he understands. All of it was in vain. He's lost himself. "Where do you want to take me?" His voice trembles with doubt, but he can't turn back. He knows that the more he tries to avoid this truth, the deeper it sinks into his life. The woman answers calmly, though her words are heavy, like stone. "We're going to the place where it all began, the place where your heart was whole, and where you could have changed your fate." Michael can't understand what she means. He doesn't want to return to the time when he was younger, full of hopes and dreams. He doesn't want to recall the moment he lost his wife. But he knows it will never leave him. This place, this unknown truth, which is only partially revealed to him. They step out onto the street, and the cold wind hits Michael's face. He feels his face tighten against the gust. She moves beside him, like a shadow, and he can't help but feel how her presence draws him in, even though she had seemed so distant. "This is so hard," he whispers, and her gaze grows even more serious. "You're afraid, Michael. You're afraid to face those parts of yourself that you tried to forget. But without this, there can be no peace. I don't know if I can handle this." He feels the heavy thoughts spinning in his head, unsure if he's ready to relive that pain. "You can." Her voice softens but remains certain. "I'm here to help you." They continue walking, and with each step, Michael feels a part of his anxiety ebb away. He realizes he won't be able to escape his past. He'll have to face everything he left behind once more. It feels like they're walking toward the very place where Michael once built his life, where everything that changed him took place. He senses that soon something will be revealed that will change him forever. Michael and the woman walk through the city, slowly approaching a place he once called home. His heart feels tightly compressed, and he senses that with each step, the ground beneath him becomes heavier, as if it's trying to swallow him whole. This place, his former estate. He hasn't been here in years. The house that once was filled with laughter and life now seems dark and abandoned. The tall gates stand wide open, unlike before, and every detail, from the stairs to the porch, reminds him of what he's lost. Michael stops at the threshold, as if hesitating to step inside. "Why are we here?" he asks, his voice barely above a whisper, as if he's afraid of waking old ghosts. The woman stands next to him, silently watching. She seems to be waiting for him to understand on his own. Her eyes glimmer in the dark, filled with compassion, not judgment. She doesn't hurry with an answer. "You know why," she finally replies, her words echoing in Michael's mind. "This is where your pain began, and here you can find the path to what you lost." Michael recalls. This was their home. Here, he and Elizabeth built their life, their dreams. He remembers choosing the room for their future children, laughing over small arguments, dreaming of a future that seemed so carefree. He remembers her face, her laugh, her warm hands that always knew how to calm him. And then everything changed. Loss, pain, loneliness. Those feelings overtook his life, and this house became his prison, a place where his heart was still buried. "I can't," he whispers, feeling his fingers tighten into fists. "I'm not ready." The woman looks at him, her eyes soft but determined. "You have no choice, Michael. All these years, you fought against yourself, against what you couldn't accept. But here, in this place, you'll find what you need. Only through courage can you find peace." Michael stands in silence, looking at the old walls of the house. He feels his heart tighten, but the inner need to resolve the past becomes stronger. And though he is afraid, he takes the first step, crossing the threshold, as if stepping over a line he hasn't dared to cross for all these years. They enter. Time seems to have stopped. Everything in the house seems unchanged, the same furniture, the same scent in the rooms. Even the light coming through the windows feels the same. But something has shifted within Michael. Each step he takes here isn't just a return to the past. It's an attempt to find himself again, among what was once his life. They approach the large room where it all began. Michael stops by an old portrait hanging on the wall. It was their wedding photo. Elizabeth, in that picture, was so alive, so smiling. Michael remembers how they stood here, side by side, back when everything seemed simple and clear. "I can't turn it all back," he says quietly. "You don't have to," she replies, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You have to see what you haven't seen. You need to set yourself free." Michael looks at the portrait and feels his heart break with the pain. But it's also the pain of absence, the emptiness he's carried for so long. And now he knows this path he started may lead to what he needs more than anything. Michael stands before the old portrait, feeling his heart contract. The same faces, the same smile. Only this moment seems so unchanging, while everything else in his life has long since drowned in a sea of pain and loneliness. He sees himself and Elizabeth in that photo when they were young and full of dreams. He remembers how, here, in this very room, they stood together, dreaming of a future that seemed so bright. "You and her," he whispers, turning to the woman standing beside him. His voice trembles. "Are you real? Are you a part of me? Or is this all just some kind of illusion?" The woman looks at him, her gaze calm yet firm. "I'm not a part of your past, Michael," she says slowly, "but I am a part of your truth. Your truth that you're afraid to face." Michael feels his heart pounding with anxiety. He wants to understand, but fear holds him back. All these years, he has been alone in his feelings, convinced that there was no way out. And now, this woman appears before him, possibly the answer to his questions, but at the same time, she raises more questions. He takes a step back and sits in the old armchair by the fireplace. The shadows around him seem so real they almost come alive. Every detail of this house is a memory, a pain, a feeling of loss. "What do you want from me?" he asks, unable to hold back the despair in his voice. "What do I have to do to find myself again?" The woman, still maintaining her calm expression, sits next to him. "You must find what you've hidden," she replies. "You need to free your heart from the weight of the past, or you'll remain trapped. It won't be easy, but it's necessary." Michael closes his eyes, once again feeling the pain he's buried for years. He doesn't want to dive back into that emptiness, that endless darkness that took away his joy. He doesn't want to remember how this woman, the one he loved, left him alone, and how he himself became a stranger to everyone, even to himself. "I don't know if I can," he whispers again, no longer believing in himself. "You can." Her voice is firm and calm. "All you need to do is take the first step. Silence." Michael sits, feeling how his thoughts are at war with one another. If only he could turn back time, if only he could avoid this loss. But now he realizes that it's impossible. He must confront what he's tried to leave behind. The woman stands and walks to the large window. She gazes out at the dark sky, then turns back to Michael. "Are you ready?" she asks, her voice warm yet piercing. Are you ready to face what you could never change? Michael takes a deep breath, once again feeling the pain stir within him. And though he's afraid, he feels this is the only way to healing. He slowly rises. Yes, he says, his voice warm and confident, even though his heart still trembles with fear. I'm ready. Michael stands before the old fireplace, where the ashes from many years ago still remain, a reminder of when this place was alive and warm. No one has used it for years. This fireplace has become a symbol of his hopelessness, much like these walls. He hears the woman quietly step behind him, but he doesn't turn around. His gaze and attention are solely on the fire that once roared here, providing warmth and comfort. Everything seems to have decayed, doesn't it? She asks from behind him. Michael glances at her silhouette, but doesn't answer immediately. His voice echoes in the empty room, like the distant echo of old pain. Yes, I think I've lost hope a long time ago, he says, his voice heavy with fatigue. The woman steps closer and places her hand on his shoulder, as if wanting to comfort him. Hope is always there, Michael, but sometimes it hides in dark corners that you're afraid to touch. You're not ready to see the whole path yet. Michael sighs deeply. His gaze returns to the empty hearth. This place, once the center of life, now feels so empty and alien. I don't know what to do with all this. How do I start living again when I feel so foreign to myself? He asks again. The woman turns to face him, her gaze calm, but her eyes reflect understanding. She knows his pain. You've already started, Michael, she says, looking at him intently. Step by step, you're getting closer to what you've long needed to see. You can't change what's happened, but you can decide how you want to live now. Michael stands in complete silence, feeling the weight of her words. He knows she's right. He's already begun. He's trying to find his way back to himself, but the path feels so complicated, so dark. My pain will never leave me, he whispers. It will always be with me. Pain is not the end, she responds, her voice firm but gentle. Pain is part of your journey. Only through accepting this pain will you find peace. It doesn't go away, but you can learn to live with it. Michael quietly looks at the walls. This place, his home. He can't leave everything behind. He can't deny what happened. He will have to accept what he's been through and somehow move forward. I'm ready, he says, his voice a little stronger now. I'm ready to accept this pain and move on. The woman smiles, her smile warm, but with a hint of concern. You're not quite ready yet, Michael. You have to look into the eyes of your dark room. Face what you don't want to see. Michael pauses, and though he's afraid, he understands this is the only way. He must face his fears, confront his past, accept it, and find a way to the light. There's no avoiding this. I'm ready. Show me, he says, for the first time in many years, feeling confident in his words. The woman looks at him and, without saying another word, slowly moves toward the door. You must walk this path alone. I will only show you the way. Michael takes a sharp breath and opens his eyes. He's standing on the promenade. The sound of waves pulls him back to reality, but everything feels hazy, as if it's just a dream. Moments ago, he was in his old house, speaking to the mysterious woman, and now he's here. He slowly looks around. Everything seems familiar. The promenade, the benches, the old street lamp barely glowing in the evening dusk. Michael touches his head, trying to understand what just happened. His heart races, and his mind struggles to piece it all together. And then he sees her, the woman in the wheelchair. She's sitting nearby, gazing at the sea. Her silhouette appears unreal against the backdrop of foaming waves. Michael freezes for a moment, as if seeing a ghost. No, this can't be, he whispers, taking a few steps toward her. The woman slowly turns her head, noticing him. Her eyes shine with a familiar warmth that makes Michael's chest tighten. You're here again, she says quietly, her voice calm but tinged with sadness. What is happening? Michael barely finds the words. Who are you? Why do you look like Elizabeth? The woman looks at him intently, but doesn't answer. Her silence feels even more unsettling to Michael. He steps closer, trying to find some meaning in this moment, but the answers seem to lie just out of reach. Is this some kind of joke? He asks, trying to catch her gaze. She only gives a faint smile. Her smile is gentle, yet piercing. You're asking the wrong questions, Michael, she says softly but firmly. Then what are the right ones? Michael steps back, trying to decipher her words. You'll find them yourself, she replies. But first, you need to answer the ones you're afraid to ask. Michael remains silent, realizing she's right, though the thought terrifies him even more. He stands still as the waves crash against the shore. Michael stands motionless, struggling to piece together his thoughts. His heart trembles with tension, and his mind refuses to accept what's happening. He takes another step toward the woman, as if hoping this movement will somehow bring clarity. What does all of this mean? He asks, trying to keep his voice steady. It comes out hoarse, as though each word is hard to force out. The woman looks at him again, her face calm and serene. She seems so composed that it only raises more questions in Michael's mind. You know, Michael, she says, her voice now softer but with a familiar undertone. Sometimes life gives us a second chance. But to seize it, you need to let go of the past. A second chance? Michael nearly laughs, bitterness dripping from his words. I've lost everything I ever had, and you're telling me this is a chance? I don't even know who you are. The woman lowers her gaze for a moment, as if giving him time to calm down. Then, in a quiet voice, she adds, the answers are close, but you must find them yourself. Michael can't take his eyes off her face. There's something in her eyes that makes him want to trust her, even if it feels like madness. I don't know if I can trust you, he says after a long pause. And that's okay, she replies, moving her wheelchair closer to the edge of the promenade. But if you don't try, you'll never know. She stops near the railing, staring out at the horizon. Her silhouette looks mysterious against the fading sunlight. Michael feels trapped, caught between wanting to leave and fearing he'll miss something vital. What am I supposed to do? He finally asks. Follow your heart, she says. And don't be afraid to take the first step. Hesitating, Michael takes a few steps forward, drawing closer. He realizes she's more than just a woman. She's the key to unlocking all his questions. But what will it cost him? Michael takes a few steps toward the woman. Her eyes are fixed on the sea, and although she looks calm, he can sense she's waiting for him. Who are you? He asks sharply, his voice trembling. And why do you look like my wife? The woman doesn't respond immediately. She turns her gaze to him, and in her eyes, Michael sees something deep and enigmatic, as if she knows more than she's willing to reveal. It's not so important who I am, she says softly, though her voice carries conviction. What matters more is who you are, Michael. Who I am. He almost laughs, though the bitterness in his voice betrays his pain. I'm the man who lost everything. The one stuck in the past, right? She looks at him calmly, her gaze unwavering. You said it, not me, she replies. Michael feels anger rising within him. You want me to figure something out, but you won't explain anything. Why are you here? Why do you look like Elizabeth? The woman lowers her gaze, as though what she's about to say will be difficult. You've been holding on to her, she says softly, without looking up. And that's what's keeping you here, in a place where you'll never find peace. I hold on to her because I loved her. Michael shouts. How can I let go of someone who meant everything to me? You're not holding on to her, she replies. You're clinging to the pain of losing her, not the love you shared. She would have wanted you to move forward. Her words strike Michael like a blow. He takes a step back, as if trying to distance himself from what he's hearing. But the truth feels inescapable. If you know so much, he says after a pause, then who are you? And why are you here? The woman takes a breath and answers. I'm a reminder, Michael. A reminder that the past doesn't have to define your future. But if you want to know more, you have to make a choice. She turns and begins moving her wheelchair toward a stone bridge that leads away from the promenade. Follow me. If you're ready to find the truth, she says without looking back. Michael stands frozen, his mind clouded with doubt. But deep down, he knows he can't stay in place any longer. After a few moments of hesitation, he takes the first step. This episode highlights Michael's inner struggle, his fear, and his desire to understand what's happening. The woman becomes not just a mystery, but also a guide, leading him toward his liberation. Michael walks slowly behind the woman as she moves toward the old stone bridge. Every step feels heavy, as if the weight of the world has suddenly doubled. He watches her back, hoping to find answers in her silent silhouette. "Where are you taking me?" he asks, though his voice wavers. "To a place where you can find answers," she replies without turning around. The bridge looks ancient and fragile, its stone slabs covered in moss and cracks. It seems as though it has been here for centuries, a witness to countless stories. The woman stops in the middle of the bridge and looks at Michael, who lingers a few steps behind her. "This isn't just a bridge," she says, her voice more serious now. "It's your choice. If you cross it, you'll see the truth, but it might change everything you've ever known. If you turn back, you'll keep your familiar reality, but the questions will remain unanswered." Michael glances at the woman, then at the bridge stretching forward, disappearing into the mist. "What if I make the wrong choice?" he asks quietly. "There is no right or wrong choice," she replies. "There's only what you're ready to accept." Michael hesitates. His heart races and his thoughts churn chaotically. He's afraid to take a step, afraid the truth might be too painful. Yet at the same time, he feels drawn to discover what lies beyond the bridge. Finally, Michael takes his first step. The stone beneath his feet creaks, but the bridge holds. He takes a deep breath and moves forward into the unknown. Michael walks forward, feeling his tension grow with each step. The woman stops in the middle of the bridge and turns to face him. Her expression is calm, but her gaze shifts. It now carries a hint of compassion. "Why did you bring me here?" Michael asks, his voice strained. "Because this bridge isn't just a place. It's a reminder," she begins. "You and Elizabeth spent hours here, talking, dreaming. This was your favorite spot, wasn't it?" Michael flinches at the mention of her name. He looks down at the stones of the bridge, which suddenly feel painfully familiar. "How do you know that?" he demands, trying to make sense of it. The woman pauses for a moment before answering. "Because I knew her. You're Elizabeth." Her words hit Michael like a tidal wave. A bitter mixture of shock and disbelief wells up inside him. "That's impossible," he says, searching for logic in her claim. "Elizabeth died years ago. Who are you? And what do you know about her?" The woman gestures toward a bench by the bridge's railing. "Sit down, Michael. It's a long story." Though hesitant, Michael complies. He sits on the bench and the woman, still in her wheelchair, positions herself nearby. "Your wife was an extraordinary woman," she begins. "She always spoke about you with love and care. But there were things she kept hidden to protect you." Michael leans forward, his hands trembling. "I knew everything about her," he says sharply. "We had no secrets." The woman gently shakes her head. "She didn't want you to know about her final decision," she continues. "Before she died, she did everything she could to make sure you could move on with your life. Her last words weren't just about love. They were about hope, that you'd find a way to be happy without her." Michael feels a deep pain tightening in his chest. "Why are you telling me this?" he asks, his voice barely audible. "Because you never gave yourself the chance to hear her. You're stuck in memories that can't change. But I'm here to remind you that life moves forward." Her words leave him dazed. He looks at the stone bridge, recalling the days he and Elizabeth spent here, laughing, dreaming of a future. Now those dreams feel so far away. "How do you know all this?" he asks again, but this time his voice is calmer. "I'm just someone who cares," she replies. "And I know Elizabeth would want you to find the strength to let her go." Michael sits, unable to believe what he's just learned. His heart is torn with emotion, and his mind refuses to accept these new truths. He feels like his past is crashing down on him again. He thought he had moved on from the loss, but now everything seems different. "You're saying she wanted me to let her go, but how do I do that?" Michael whispers, struggling to cope with the flood of emotions. The woman looks at him with understanding and softly responds. "She never asked you to forget her. She asked you to give yourself a chance to feel life again. She was always strong, Michael, but her strength wasn't in keeping you tied to the past. Her strength was in moving forward." Michael doesn't know how to respond. He feels a battle of emotions inside. Pain, anger, sorrow, and at the same time, understanding. He looks at her and realizes she's speaking the truth. I don't know if I can do this," he says, looking into her eyes. "How can I live without the one I loved?" The woman steps closer. "Life doesn't stop, even when we wish it would," she replies. "And if you truly loved her, the best thing you can do is live the way she would have wanted you to. She would want you to be happy, not broken by her passing." Michael breathes deeply and looks around. The bridge they love seems the same, yet everything around him has changed. All these years, trying to hold on to the past, nothing has changed except for the feeling that his life has been slipping away. "You're right," he says after a pause. "She would want me to move on." The woman nods, her eyes full of compassion. "It will be hard, but you can do it." Michael stands up from the bench, and for a moment, there's a sense of relief in his heart. He still doesn't know how to live without her, but he's ready to try. Michael wakes up in a hospital room. His eyes struggle to open, and his head throbs from the bright light streaming through the window. He feels a sharp pain in his head and weakness throughout his body. Everything that happened seems like just a strange, chaotic dream. Slowly, he turns his head to look around, and his gaze meets the nurse sitting nearby, watching him closely. "How are you feeling?" she asks, her voice calm and reassuring. Michael furrows his brow, trying to remember what happened. The scene with the bridge, the conversation with the woman, it all feels distant, like a memory that doesn't quite make sense. He can only hear his own quick, heavy breathing. "What happened? Where am I?" he asks, still trying to understand where he is. "You were at a charity event, Michael," the nurse replies, her voice calm but with a hint of concern. "You fell and hit your head. We've checked everything, you're fine, but you need to rest." Michael nods, though he feels something isn't quite right. His thoughts are scattered, and he tries to remember how he ended up here, and whether all that he experienced was just a product of his imagination. Was it a dream?" he asks quietly. The nurse looks at him carefully, her face full of sympathy. "You can rest now, Michael. A dream is just a dream. Your body needs to recover." But Michael feels his heart tighten at her answer. All those emotions, the conversations with the stranger on the bridge, were they real? Or had he just lost his mind? He closes his eyes and feels a heaviness in his chest. The memories of the woman, of the conversation, of his Elizabeth, they remain like a dark shadow. A few minutes later, the door opens and the doctor enters. "Michael, how are you feeling?" he asks, smiling. "We just want to make sure everything is fine after your fall." Michael lifts his head, trying to gather his thoughts. I don't know," he replies quietly. "It feels like I went through something more than just a fall." The doctor nods, though he seems calm. "It could be part of the head injury, Michael. Head trauma can cause strange visions and confusion. But don't worry, it will pass. You just need rest and time to recover." Michael feels a wave of disappointment wash over him. Everything he experienced might have just been his mind trying to cope with the loss. But the question remains, was it just a dream, or did he truly experience something he hadn't seen before? "We'll run more tests, Michael," the doctor continues, trying to reassure him. "But right now, you need to rest." Michael closes his eyes again his head aching, and he feels himself sinking back into the darkness of sleep, with a bitter sense that all his memories might just be fleeting echoes of the past. Michael had just been discharged from the hospital, and although he felt much better after the fall, the events of the past few days lingered in his mind. What he had experienced seemed so real and yet incomprehensible, and he couldn't shake the thoughts of the woman in the wheelchair that he had seen on the bridge. As he left the hospital, Michael rode in the car, lost in thought. He felt like he was returning to his normal life, but every time he tried to think clearly, his memories of this woman kept coming back. And now, when the car stopped at a red light, he saw her again. The woman in the wheelchair was standing at the same bus stop where he had seen her before. She looked as if nothing had changed in her life. Every feature of her face, her expression, everything was familiar, down to the smallest details. Michael's heart skipped a beat. This was the same woman. He couldn't just drive past her without doing anything. He asked the driver to stop and quickly got out of the car. His legs were trembling with nervous excitement, but he couldn't leave it all unanswered. "Excuse me, but," he approached her, trying to keep his voice steady. "You look very much like my wife. I saw you on the bridge, and now you're here. I don't understand what's happening." The woman looked at him calmly, but her gaze was strange, as if she knew exactly why he was approaching her. Her eyes were deep, without a trace of surprise or fear. She remained silent for a few seconds before speaking. "Maybe it's just a coincidence," she said. Her voice was quiet and soft, but there was no emotion in it. "I don't know who you are or why you're trying to find me, but I have nothing to do with this." Michael stood before her, completely confused. He felt that she wasn't telling the whole truth, but he couldn't understand why. Why did she look like his late wife? Why was her gaze so familiar? "This can't be a coincidence," he said desperately. "You look exactly the same. I saw you in my dreams. I saw you on the bridge. What does this all mean?" The woman looked at him again, her expression unchanged. She was silent for a long time before finally replying. "I can't explain something I don't understand myself," she said, her voice softer, as though she had something important to say but couldn't find the words. "But if you want to know more, maybe you should just talk to me." Michael felt his heart race. This was exactly what he had been looking for. He couldn't leave it unanswered. Something in her words, in her gaze, made him want to know more. "I want to know," he said quietly, his eyes filled with determination. The woman smiled, but her smile wasn't light or joyful. She nodded. "Then maybe you should walk me home. If you really want to know, I'm ready to tell you everything." Michael didn't hesitate. He realized that this was a moment when he had to make a choice, whether to continue his search for the truth or leave it all in the past. Michael didn't hesitate. He started walking beside her, trying to make sense of what was happening. The woman slowly pushed her wheelchair forward, and Michael walked beside her, listening closely to every word she said. He didn't know exactly what he was searching for, but something inside him told him he was on the right path. They walked for a few minutes in silence until she spoke again. I really don't remember much," she said. "The accident happened almost 3 years ago. I don't remember anything after they pulled me from the wreckage. I only remember darkness, pain, and then I woke up here, on this wheelchair." Michael felt his heart squeeze. He listened intently, and every word felt like a long-forgotten memory coming back. "You can't be my wife," Michael whispered, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "My wife died 3 years ago in the accident. I buried her. I can't believe you're her." The woman stopped and looked at him. Her gaze became more penetrating, and a shadow of despair appeared in her eyes. "I understand your doubt, but your face, it's so familiar to me. I don't remember who you are, but when I look at you, I feel like I've known you forever. Something in your eyes, something in your soul. I can't explain it." Michael stood before her, trying to understand what he had just heard. His heart was pounding in his chest. This wasn't just a strange coincidence. You really don't remember anything?" he asked, trying to read her eyes. "No, I was in darkness, and then here I am. And every time I see you, I feel this strange yet familiar attachment that I can't explain." Michael was stepping closer to the truth. He felt there might be more to this than just a weird coincidence. Maybe he had found his beloved again, but she didn't remember him. And that was so hard to accept, he didn't know how to handle it. "You're my wife," he whispered, but it was more of a question than a statement. She took a deep breath, and a shadow of pain flickered in her eyes. "Maybe, but I can't be sure until I remember at least part of my past. I need time, and maybe you can help me remember." Michael was stunned, but his heart beat faster than ever before. He realized his life was changing again. This wasn't a dream. This was reality, and he needed to accept it. "I'll be here for you. I'll help you remember everything," he replied with determination. They continued walking, and Michael felt that with every step, he was getting closer to uncovering all the secrets hidden in this strange encounter. He didn't know what awaited them, but his heart had no doubt. He was ready to fight for his love, even if it meant starting all over again. The following weeks were filled with uncertainty, but also with hope. Michael stayed by her side, helping her recover. He was cautious, supporting her while giving her the space she needed for those moments when she might remember something important, all the while trying not to pressure her. Each day was a small step forward. They spent time together at the hospital, where she underwent rehabilitation, and every time Michael stayed with her, she began to uncover more fragments of her past. She remembered the smell of his aftershave, the touches that brought thoughts of family comfort, but she still couldn't fully recall her true identity. One day, sitting on a park bench, she looked at Michael and said, "I remember your eyes, how they always light up when you think about something. It feels so familiar. And you always wore black t-shirts, didn't you?" Michael smiled, though he could feel the pain rising in his chest. He nodded in affirmation. "Yes, I used to wear black t-shirts a lot. And you always laughed when I wore them. You used to say it made me look like a rock star." She laughed, and it sounded like the familiar laughter from her past, though it wasn't quite the same. She tried to recall more, but once again, she looked at him as if searching for answers to questions she couldn't put into words. I want to remember more," she said, her gaze focused on her hands gripping her wheelchair. "But every time I try, everything just dissolves into darkness. I'm scared, Michael. I'm afraid I won't be able to find myself again." Michael sat beside her and took her hand. "Don't worry. You're not alone. We'll be together, and I'll help you remember. We'll start over if we need to, and this time we'll be ready for everything." She looked at him, and a faint hope flickered in her eyes. It was more than just words. It was a promise he had to keep. A few days later, after another rehabilitation session, she suddenly stopped when they were walking together down the hospital corridor. Her eyes widened with surprise. "Michael, I remember our house. I remember us sitting together at the table in the morning, drinking coffee, and you always said you wanted to go to the sea, but you never found the time. I remember your old books on the shelf, and I always laughed at how you never threw anything away, even if it was outdated." Michael stopped, not believing his ears. His heart swelled with joy. "You remember?" he asked, amazed. "You really remember?" She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "I remember, Michael. I remember you, and I want to get back everything I lost." Michael embraced her, feeling the warmth of her body giving him strength. This was the moment he had been waiting for all these months. She was returning to him, and even if it was only part of her memory, it was enough to feel that they could be together again. Now, all they had to do was continue down this path, the path of recovery and healing. Their hearts beat in unison, and Michael knew that they could find their former love again, even if it meant going through many struggles and challenges.